Okay, this is our my attempt to make up for the fact that we missed that I just somehow blew it on the audio recording when we did chapter 4. So bear with me. It's a little weird doing it by myself without you all and asking questions and interacting, but I'll do my best. Um, what I guess the key takeaway from the previous part that I want us to have in mind when we look at chapter 4 is this bit about what happened when his mother and brothers came. They wanted to see him. So they sent word. They sent to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, there we go, your mother and brothers are outside seeking you. And he answered them, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. So here he's distinguishing. It isn't by literal birth that you become his follower, his family. It is by doing his will. And that kind of the insiders, outsiders theme will continue as we go into chapter 4. Chapter 4 is something that almost everyone has heard at some point. This is the parable of the they call it parable of the seeds or the sower often, but it really has more to do with the ground the seed lands in. So I'll read aloud fairly quickly. You can follow along, and then we'll work our way through it. All right, chapter 4, verse 1. And again he began to teach beside the sea, and a very large crowd gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat in it on the sea, and the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. So can you picture this? He's in a boat close to the shore, and everyone else is sitting on the land. Notice it also said, and a very large crowd gathered about him. Had he not gotten in the boat, the risk was him being sort of pushed into the sea anyway. So this was not a bad idea. Anyway, listen, behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, and now we have a description of 4 different ways the soil lands. Some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured it. Quick, fell along the path. It really never takes root, right? Other seed fell on rocky ground where it didn't have much soil, and immediately it sprang up since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched. And since it had no root, it withered away. You see all these explaining to you. It lands, it springs up quickly because there wasn't much soil, but also because there was not much soil. There was no real root, and then it withered. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. Okay, we're 0 for 3. And other seeds fell into good soil and produced grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. And he said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, all's well and good here, but isn't it a strange thing that he ends it with, he who has ears to hear, let him hear? Well, that becomes, he'll explain that in a minute, but initially you tell a story and then you tell them, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And when he was alone, those around him with the 12 asked him about the parables. And he said to them, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. But for those outside, everything is in parables, so that they may indeed see but not perceive, and may indeed hear but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. So I'm not sure what it doesn't tell us what they asked him about. I presume they asked him about what it meant. Actually, I'll keep reading, and this is why I presume it. And he said to them, do you not understand the parable, this parable? How then will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word, and these are the ones along the path. So he'll break it down. I'm not going to do that quite yet. I want to talk about this his reference to, this is from Isaiah chapter 6. It's a difficult passage because it appears to be, remember I said we're doing insiders, outsiders. Here he's saying to you, the insiders, my people, the family, my brothers and sisters who have followed me, who obey me, has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. But for those outside, everything is in parables. Presumably, it isn't a puzzle if you are among those who have been given the secret of the kingdom of God. And they, from what he said in verse 13, down here, they should have understood it. He was a bit upset or put off, or do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand? I know I've said this many times in our meetings, but boy, it's really helpful to hear how often they mess up because they're right there and they still missed a lot of things. So I feel a little bit better. But anyway, back to this part, the quote from Isaiah. It comes at actually a pretty critical time. I wish I'd planned ahead a bit. Let me see if I could find this quickly. I'm going to pause this to save all of us some pain. Hold on a minute. Okay, did you miss me? So I was able to pull up on the screen Isaiah. This is Isaiah chapter 6, and it is from here that Jesus quotes. Let me back it up a bit, because what happened right before this is a grand scene. Let's just read it. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, each had 6 wings. With 2, each of the seraphim covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Just a total side note. It's not often that we hear about people singing. Oh, I didn't want that. Here we go. I wanted this to be highlighted, but I'm not sure how to do it. All right. And I just thought we'll do it another time. But when angels sing, or cherubs or seraphs sing, it's a bigger deal, I think. But this is a pretty big deal. Maybe I'll cut all of this. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called. And the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. I'll probably cut this. And then Isaiah in verse 8 says, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Well, here I am, send me. He had just been anointed. He was made clean. The seraph came and touched his lips. And then he hears what the message is. Okay, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Now, real quick, we'll go back here. Notice that's just the first 2 verses, and then it skips ahead quite a bit. So what we're reading now comes in between, right here. This is the part. Okay, so make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, until cities lie waste without inhabitant and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land, and so on. So why am I bringing that up? Because as I was getting ready to talk about Mark 4, I decided to go back and check where it came from, like we're doing together, and noticed that there was a bunch of parts missing, but also that I thought, let's look at it in the Hebrew and see what it says. And I discovered something kind of strange, and I've not spent enough time researching this, but for this verse in the Hebrew, this is lest they see is an active verb with their eyes. And hear, also active verb, with their ears. And understand with their hearts. This is a little different. It is active, and it's translated as active. But what's tricky, I think, is I think in the Hebrew, it's, you know what, I'm going to pause again and just pull it up. Okay, it's confirmed. So in this translation, you have, lest they see with their eyes. In the Hebrew, there's a marker that actually makes it with their eyes, as opposed to their eyes see. Okay, they're seeing with their eyes. And with their ears, they hear. Again, marked specifically to say with. The next one, though, there's a couple of strange things about it. First, there's potential. Again, I haven't spent enough time with this, and I'm not sure I have all the resources available to do it here, but there may be indication this is a bit of a disjunction. You have the next clause actually beginning, well, I guess that wouldn't work because it's also but with their, never mind, I'll take that back. Anyway, but it doesn't have the mark. The with their hearts part, there is no with. It just says, and they understand, and it has their hearts or his heart. Only because people is a singular. So we'll just say they, okay? Lest they see with their eyes, yes. It's lest they hear with their ears, yes. I think it's actually okay to translate this, and their hearts understand. It could go either way. I'm not really annoyed with this as much. I think it, again, more time will tell, but I just find it interesting that the pattern is broken in the Hebrew. And then the next thing you have in the Hebrew is and turn, they turn. And the last thing, okay, and turn, pretty simple. And then it says and be healed, but in the Hebrew, it's also active. And it's not just be healed, it's heal, and it kind of seems like and heal himself is what it says. This is probably way more than you ever wanted to know about penguins, but I bring it up because I think there's something else going on. I think it has a lot more to do with this us and them, inside, outside, who's my family, who's not. And there's a sense, and also, let me just go back for a second to the Isaiah passage. Because he, as in Isaiah's first question here is, how long, O Lord? And he said, until cities lie waste without inhabitant. So he said, make the heart of these people dull. We don't want them to hear, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and heal themselves. And Isaiah wants to know how long, and he answers until everything's a wreck. And again, this is all so preliminary, but I'll have to do much more research. I don't know before I take this further, but I think it's interesting that what it brought to mind, this Isaiah passage, until cities lie waste, this idea that you don't want them to be very efficient. You don't want their hearts, um, if they were to see and hear, they would then heal themselves. If that's the better translation, then they're not with God. They're not obeying God. They're doing something on their own. And it brought to mind the Tower of Babel, which we will go over in our greatest hits series that I hope to start in the fall. But, and I probably told you way more than you needed to ever know about this part. But anyway, I'll continue, and if worst comes to worst, I'll just cut it all out and save it for another video. In the meantime, if it's sort of like the Tower of Babel, it is a critical moment, and what he's saying is they're trying to do things their own way. You go back to our passage now, okay? And he seems to be saying they're not supposed to understand things unless they're understanding it through me, with me. Okay? So then he unpacks and he goes through the parables systematically, right? He goes through and what each of the types of where the seeds landed. He goes through and talks about what their how the effect that they had, and he's talking about hearing the word. And this is his word. Remember, all through Mark, he has made a distinction between like spiritual forces. Ooh, look at that! I went off the screen. Spiritual forces and earthly forces. Illness is an earthly one. Demon possession is a spiritual one. So he was he was merciful, did a lot of healing, but he didn't want all of the attention that brings and crowds that brings for that. He was interested in people hearing the word. But he also says to the 12 that they're the ones who should be able to hear these parables and understand it. And that's not the only time he said it or the only time he will say it in Mark. That he wants them to get to the point. He'll answer their questions afterwards. So he's a good teacher. You know, they're getting to the point of learning more what these parables say and do and how they work. But I think it's important to recognize a couple things out of this. One, that it is in fact the case that the inside outside is a big deal. I'm gonna have to figure out this recording. It keeps changing my color, doesn't it? Anyway, that those on the inside and who are his family are the ones who follow him, obey him, know him, and will understand these parables. But everyone else isn't to understand it insofar as that might lead, if they're not following him. Another good point about this is you notice he says, where'd it go? This part. When he was alone, those around him with the 12, those around him with the 12. It isn't just the 12. It's those who continue to follow him afterwards. So he's inviting people to follow him, to be his family. And those are the ones he'll explain things to. But outside of that, there's no use for them to have this knowledge. In fact, they'll try to heal themselves by it. I realize I didn't go through all of the different kinds of grounds, but honestly, I think that's something fairly common. You've most likely heard that, we're like that. We get all excited about a thing, we get home from the retreat, and then we go back to our old ways. It didn't take root. I'm thinking of the rocky ground at that point. Oh, the birds, the first one, right? Is that the one? No, the path. It's sown and then it's taken right away. Um, and then the stony ground where it's comes up. It's excitement. There's a lot of emotion, but it doesn't last. Thorns, where you have this later on in the parable of the wheat and the tares. It's called, but if they're all growing up together, if anybody's ever done gardening, weeds don't help the cause. You want to get them out as long as you could tell what's a weed and what isn't, right? And but eventually they're just going to be immature. They're not going to grow as well. Even if you have healthy ones, well, this is me dealing with my garden now. What I've learned is, as hard as it is to get rid of live and apparently healthy plants, it's important because after I did do that, the ones that remained grew much faster and bigger. So anyway, that's not in the parable. That's just me thinking about my garden and the battles I have with the deer. And then finally, there's good soil. And they grow, and it's not just pretty, it's not just bearing fruit, it's bearing fruit to 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. That's what he wants. This is the life, the future of the church. And this is how he wants his people to understand. Yeah, I don't know. I could probably have done a better job with the preaching part of this. I just was a little bit stuck, as you probably gathered, on the idea that the reference to Isaiah is really forcing us to think about the context in which we are supposed to understand what it is we're supposed to understand and by whom, and we're not the ones who heal ourselves ever. It's only God who does that. And any attempt to do it ourselves proves we've missed the point. And, at some point, if you want, you can ask me about why I connected it with the Tower of Babel and what was I thinking about that? Because it honestly just jumped at me. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that. I don't know if there's any good argument against that yet, but I'll do my best to feel it out and see. So, how's that for Mark 4 for now? It's a bit longer than I intended. I was hoping these videos would stick to maybe 15 minutes, but if I cut the whole middle part out, maybe that's what we get. Anyway, thanks for listening. Feel free to comment or ask questions in the comments, and I'll make sure to check and see if I can follow it up. Clearly, we didn't finish with Mark chapter 4, so we'll pick it up with verse 26, where he does various kingdom of God is like. Okay? So we'll go to those two, and then the end of the night, and then that's probably just good for one more video. We'll just do the end of chapter 4. All right? Thanks, guys. Bye.